The moment Elliot Marsh saw the boy's drawing, he felt something crack open inside his chest, something he had spent 11 years trying to keep sealed shut. It was a Tuesday, the kind of gray, forgettable Tuesday that exists only to fill space between more meaningful days. Elliot had come to the community center on Prescott Street, not because he wanted to, but because his assistant Deirdre had scheduled it, and Deirdre had worked for him long enough to know that if she put something on the calendar, he would show up. He always showed up. Showing up was the one thing Elliot Marsh had never failed at, even when everything else fell apart. He was 53 years old. He ran a mid-sized construction firm that had grown, through 2 recessions and 1 near bankruptcy, into one of the more respected companies in the state. He had a house with too many rooms, a driver named Cal, who knew when to talk and when not to, and a habit of working until 11 at night because the alternative was sitting in silence and remembering things he didn't want to remember. People who knew him from board meetings or charity galas saw a composed man in a well-cut suit. People who knew him at all saw a man who had learned to function in the place where grief used to live. The community center visit was part of a corporate outreach initiative. His firm had donated the lumber and framing for the center's new East Wing, and someone thought it would make good press if Elliot stopped by to see the after-school program. He had agreed, which meant he was now standing in a room that smelled like paste and crayons and somebody's leftover lunch, watching 20-odd children bend over construction paper at long folding tables. A woman named Ms. Tran, who ran the program, was guiding him through the space with the practiced warmth of someone who had given this tour many times. She pointed out the reading corner, the art supplies donated by a local pharmacy, the bookshelf the kids had painted themselves in a wobbly rainbow of colors. Elliot nodded and asked reasonable questions and was genuinely trying to be present, which was harder than it sounded. That was when he noticed the boy at the table in the corner. He was sitting slightly apart from the others, not in a way that suggested he'd been excluded, but in the way that some children simply prefer, a little insulated, a little self-contained. He looked about 10 or 11, small for his age, with dark circles under his eyes that had no business being on a child's face. His sneakers were held together at the toe with a strip of electrical tape. He was drawing with the focused intensity of someone doing important work, pressing a dark blue crayon so hard against the paper that Elliot could hear the faint scrape of it from across the room. Miss Tran noticed Elliot looking. "That's Theo," she said quietly. "Theo Adair. He comes every day after school. Very quiet, very sweet." Elliot almost moved on. He almost asked about the reading program instead, which was the next item on the tour. But something about the boy held him. Some quality he couldn't name yet. Something in the set of the child's shoulders, the way he kept his head down as if protecting what was on the paper. "Would it be all right if I said hello?" Elliot asked. Miss Tran smiled. "Of course." He crossed the room and crouched beside the table, which felt slightly ridiculous in his suit, but he did it anyway because looming over a child was no way to introduce yourself. "That's some serious work," Elliot said. The boy looked up. He had dark eyes and a cautious face, the face of a child who had learned to assess adults before trusting them. He studied Elliot for a moment with those careful eyes, then looked back at his drawing. "It's a lighthouse," Theo said. Elliot leaned in slightly to look. It was in fact a lighthouse, rendered with a surprising amount of care and detail for a child his age. The boy had drawn the rocks at the base, the spiral pattern on the tower, even the small beam of light cutting across a dark blue ocean. And at the base of the lighthouse, almost hidden in the rocks, was a small figure, a woman it looked like, with her arms wrapped around herself, looking up at the beam. "Who's that?" Elliot asked, pointing to the figure. Theo was quiet for a moment. "My mum," he said simply, as if this were not a complicated answer at all. "She likes lighthouses. She used to draw them." Theo set down the blue crayon and picked up a gray one. "She said a lighthouse never goes looking for anyone. It just stays where it is and keeps the light on, and that's how people find their way home." Elliot went very still. He had heard those words before, not similar words, those exact words in that exact order, with that exact rhythm. He had heard them in a voice that was not a child's voice, spoken on a night a long time ago, on a trip he and his wife had taken to the Maine coast, standing outside a lighthouse that had been decommissioned and turned into a museum. She had read that phrase off an interpretive sign, and then turned to him with her eyes bright and said, "That's it. That's exactly it. as if she had been looking for those words for years. Her name was Sela. She had been gone for 11 years. A car accident on a mountain road in February, a patch of black ice, a guardrail that didn't hold. The police had found the car, but the recovery had been difficult and partial, and there had been a closed casket service in April of that year, and Elliot had stood at the front of a church, full of people who loved her and felt the floor open under his feet and had never fully found solid ground again. He sat back on his heels and looked at the boy. "Theo," he said carefully, "where did your mom hear that? About the lighthouse?" The boy shrugged one shoulder. "She just always said it. She says it when I'm scared, like, 'Just be the lighthouse, Theo. You don't have to go find anything. Just keep the light on.'" He paused. "She has a picture of one, too. On the back of a little notebook she keeps in her coat. She drew it herself." Elliot's hands hanging between his knees were not entirely steady. "Is your mom?" He stopped. He wasn't sure how to ask the next question without it sounding like what it was, which was a man grasping at something so unlikely it had no business being grasped at. "Does your mom live here, in the city? We live on Carver Street," Theo said. "Apartment 4C. He looked up again with those careful eyes. "Why?" "I'm sorry," Elliot said, pulling himself back. "I didn't mean to pry. Your drawing is really beautiful, Theo. Your mom is lucky to have an artist in the family." The boy's expression shifted into something that was almost a smile, small, private, pointed mostly downward. "She teaches me," he said. "She used to teach art. Before. That word landed like something heavy. Elliot stood up slowly. His knees ached. He was too old to crouch like that and he'd be paying for it later. But he was not thinking about his knees. He was thinking about a phrase that had belonged to his wife, a private turn of phrase she had found on an interpretive sign at a decommissioned lighthouse in Maine and adopted as her own, and whether there was any logical way a child in this city had come to know those same words in that same order from a woman who drew lighthouses in a small notebook. He thanked Miss Tran. He shook the necessary hands. He rode back to his office in the back seat of Cal's car and stared out the window at the passing city and said nothing for the entire 40-minute drive. That night, alone in the house with too many rooms, he made a decision that any reasonable person would have talked him out of. He decided to come back. He came back the next afternoon, and the one after that. He didn't make a show of it. He brought nothing, announced nothing, simply arrived and sat with Miss Tran's permission, and sometimes talked with Theo and sometimes just watched him draw. The boy accepted his presence with the same careful wariness he seemed to apply to everything, testing it daily, finding it consistent, and slowly, the way children do when they've been burned before, beginning to relax. On the fourth visit, Theo asked him what he did. "I build things," Elliot said. "Like what?" "Buildings, mostly. Offices. Sometimes houses." Theo considered this. "My mom says buildings are just promises," he said. "Like someone promised there would be a place for people to be, and then someone else built the promise." Elliot looked at him for a long moment. "That's a remarkable thing to say." "She says it," Theo clarified, as if Elliot might be giving him too much credit. "Your mom sounds like a pretty remarkable person." Theo was quiet. He picked up his crayon and put it down again. "She's sick," he said. She can't work right now. She had an accident a long time ago, and she still has headaches, bad ones, and sometimes she doesn't remember things right." He said this the way children say hard things, plainly, without embellishment, because they haven't yet learned to soften difficult truths with qualifications. "She's better than she was, but she's not like she used to be. I don't really remember what she used to be like because I was little." Elliot held himself very carefully together. "How old are you, Theo?" 11. 11. He did the arithmetic without wanting to. Sela had been gone 11 years, not 9, not 8, 11. And this boy was 11 years old. "Does your mom?" He stopped again, recalibrated. "Has she always lived here? In this city?" Theo shook his head. "We moved here 3 years ago. Before that we lived with Grandma Bet in Carrington, and before that I don't know. Mom doesn't talk about before that." Carrington was 4 hours north. A small town, mountain roads. Elliot knew Carrington because it was near the area where Sela's accident had been reported. He was not a man given to magical thinking. He had built a company on material realities, concrete and load-bearing walls and site surveys and liability insurance. He did not believe in signs or miracles or the universe sending messages. He believed in evidence and logic and the slow, stubborn work of surviving. But he was also a man who had spent 11 years knowing, in some part of himself he could never fully silence, that something wasn't right. Not right about the recovery. Not right about the service. Not right about any of it. He went home that night and opened a box he hadn't opened in 6 years. It was a wooden box, not large, that had sat on the top shelf of the closet in the room he used as an office. Inside it were the things the police had recovered from the car. A scarf, a cracked phone, a keychain with a small enamel lighthouse on it that she had bought at a gift shop in Maine. He held the keychain for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called a man he knew. Not a detective exactly, but a former investigator who now did private consulting. A man named Wes, who was good at finding things that had been lost or hidden or both. "I need you to look into something," Elliot said, "and I need you to be thorough." Wes was thorough. It took him 11 days. He called on a Thursday morning, and Elliot took the call, standing at his office window looking down at the city. "Her name now is Serena Adair," Wes said. "The name is partially hers. She uses her mother's maiden name, Adair. The first name she changed. Birth certificate for the boy shows the mother listed as Serena Adair. Father," Wes paused, "father listed as unknown." Elliot pressed his hand flat against the glass. The glass was cold. He was distantly aware of that. "She was found by a highway patrol officer 9 months after the accident," Wes continued. "Disoriented, significant head trauma, no identification. She spent 14 months in a county medical facility before she was discharged into the care of a woman named Betty Adair, her aunt, as far as I can tell. The head trauma caused significant memory disruption. From the medical records I could access, she remembered fragments, but not continuity, not enough to know who she was." He paused again. "She was pregnant when they found her." Elliot closed his eyes. "She built a life," Wes said, not unkindly. "It's a hard life, but she built it. The boy is healthy. She recovered a lot of what she lost over time, but there are still gaps. From what I can tell, she knows she had a life before. She just doesn't know what it was." For a long time, Elliot said nothing. Outside the window, the city went about its business. Cabs and delivery trucks, and people walking fast with their heads down against the November wind. The world entirely indifferent to the fact that he was standing in his office trying to remember how to breathe. "Elliot," Wes said carefully. "Thank you, Wes," Elliot said. His voice was steady. He didn't know how. "Send me everything." He didn't go to Carver Street right away. He spent 2 weeks not going, because showing up at the apartment of a woman who did not know who she was, who did not know who he was, felt like something that could shatter irreparably if he handled it wrong. He talked to a doctor who specialized in traumatic memory. He talked to a lawyer. He talked, unexpectedly, and for 3 hours one evening, to his sister Paulette, who cried and then told him to stop overthinking and go. He went back to the community center first. He sat with Theo, and Theo showed him a new drawing, a house this time, not elaborate, just a simple house with a light in every window. "Why is every light on?" Elliot asked. Theo looked at the drawing as if this were obvious, because everyone's home. Elliot sat with that for a moment. "Theo," he said, "I'd like to meet your mom, if she'd be willing." He kept his voice steady, even, careful, the voice he used when a deal could go either way, and everything depended on not applying too much pressure. I think we might know some of the same people, from a long time ago, and I think it might be good for her to know that." Theo studied him with those dark, assessing eyes. "She doesn't really like meeting new people," he said. "She gets nervous. I understand. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, but if you wanted to ask her—" He reached into his coat pocket and took out a card, a plain card with just his name and number on it. He held it out. "She can call me first if she'd like. We can just talk on the phone. No pressure." Theo looked at the card for a long moment. Then he took it with the careful gravity of a child accepting a responsibility. "I'll ask her," he said. The call came on a Saturday morning 9 days later. The voice on the other end was careful and quiet, and held a slight hesitation before every sentence. Not uncertainty, exactly, but the habit of someone who had learned to choose words precisely because language had once been unreliable for her. "This is Serena Adair," she said. "My son says you wanted to talk to me." "Thank you for calling," Elliot said. He was sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee he had not touched. His hands were flat on the table. He had decided he would not push. He would not name what he suspected. He would let her lead, and he would follow. "Theo is a remarkable kid," He talks about you a lot. He talks about you too, she said. He says you listen. I try to. A small silence then. He says you build things. I do. He told me. She paused. He told me what I said, about buildings being promises. I don't even remember saying that to him. A lot of what I say to him I learned somewhere, and I don't always know where. There was no self-pity in her voice when she said it, just an honest accounting of how her memory worked. But he says you liked it. I did, Elliot said. I'd heard something like it before. He paused. He had decided to do this carefully, but he also knew that careful had a limit. Mrs. Adair. Serena, I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfortable conversation. Silence on her end. I think we may have met before, he said. A long time ago. I don't want to overwhelm you with that, and I don't want to tell you who I think you are, because that's yours to know in your own time, in your own way. But I think there are some things you might want to see. Old things, if you're willing. Another silence. Longer this time. What kind of things? She asked. Photographs. Some letters. A keychain. He paused. A lighthouse. He heard her exhale. Just one small breath, barely audible, but it was the breath of someone who had been told something that connected to something else they couldn't reach. The sound of a door finding its frame. Can I bring Theo? She asked. Of course, Elliot said. They came on a Sunday afternoon. He had thought about staging it differently. Flowers, or some kind of prepared context, but in the end he simply tidied the house and made coffee and put the wooden box on the kitchen table and waited. Cal picked them up from Carver Street. Elliot stood at the front door and watched the car pull in, and felt, for the first time in 11 years, that the floor under his feet was solid. She was thin, and her hair was shorter than he remembered, and there were things in her face that hadn't been there before. A carefulness, a certain quality of attention that came from years of having to work harder than other people to hold the world in focus. But it was her. It was Selah. It was the woman who had stood outside a lighthouse in Maine and found the word she'd been looking for her whole life. She stopped on the front walk and looked at him. Theo stood beside her, holding her hand, watching both of them with those dark, careful eyes. I know you, she said. It wasn't a question. You do, Elliot said. She looked at the house, at the front door, the roofline, the old oak tree on the left side of the yard. Something moved through her face. Not recognition exactly, but the tremor before recognition, the way a word feels when it's right at the edge of coming back to you. I dreamed about a tree like that, she said quietly. I always thought it was just something my brain made up. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Theo tugged her hand gently. Come on, Mom, he said. They went inside together. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them, with the wooden box between them. Elliot opened it slowly and set the items out, one by one, the scarf, the phone, the enamel keychain with the lighthouse on it. He watched her face as each one appeared. When she saw the keychain, she reached out and picked it up before she seemed to realize she was doing it. She held it in her palm and looked at it for a long time. I have one like this, she said. I know, Elliot said. You bought it in Maine. There's a photograph. He slid an envelope across the table. Already open. She took out the photograph with her free hand and looked at it. It was the two of them, 11 years ago, outside the lighthouse. She was laughing at something he'd said. Her head tipped back, and he was looking at her with an expression that he hadn't been able to look at directly until recently. The expression of a man who had no idea how fast everything was about to change. She stared at the photograph for a very long time. Theo watched his mother. His hand found hers on the table and held it. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet, but she was not crying, not yet. She was holding everything together with the same focused intensity she had once brought to a crayon and a sheet of construction paper. Tell me, she said, all of it, from the beginning. So he did. He talked for a long time. He told her about the lighthouse trip and the accident and the service and the 11 years of not quite believing. He told her about Theo's drawing and the words about the lighthouse and the phone call to Wes. He told her about the doctor and the lawyer and his sister Paulette, who had told him to stop overthinking and go. He told her everything he could tell her, steadily and without rushing, the way you tell someone something that has been waiting to be said for too long. She listened to all of it. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. I'm sorry, she said. For all of it. For the years. You don't need to be sorry, Elliot said. You didn't leave. You were lost. That's different. Theo, who had been sitting very still throughout all of this, looked at Elliot. "So you knew my mom," he said. "From before?" "I did," Elliot said. "Like, how?" Elliot glanced at Sella. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, cautious and open at once, like a window left ajar. "That's a longer conversation," Elliot said. "One your mom and I will need to have together first. But yes, I knew her, and she knew me." He paused. "And I'd very much like to know both of you again if you'll let me." Theo appeared to think this over with the seriousness it deserved. Then he nodded once, decisive, in the way that children make decisions when they've already done the math and reached the conclusion before anyone else in the room. "Okay," he said, "but I get to ask questions too." "As many as you want," Elliot said. Outside, the November light was going amber and low across the kitchen floor. The old oak tree in the yard threw long shadows across the front walk. At some point, Sella reached across the table and set her hand over Elliot's, not saying anything, just placing it there, tentative, uncertain, but there. The way a lighthouse doesn't go looking, it just keeps the light on. And somewhere, on the other side of a city that had been holding its breath for 11 years, a man named Raymond, the man who had run Sella off that mountain road and watched the car go over and driven away, was about to find out that what he thought he had buried was very much still alive. But that was a story for another day.